The suspicion. It was a rare, sun-drenched afternoon in Oak Ridge, the kind of day that seemed to wrap itself in a sense of timeless perfection. The sky was a flawless, endless blue, a few fluffy clouds drifting lazily past, while the laughter of children and the chatter of families filled the air. Oak Ridge Park was bustling with life. Families spread out on colorful blankets, kids darting around in playful abandon, and older couples strolling hand in hand along the winding paths. Among the crowd was Karen Turner, a woman who had lived in Oak Ridge for as long as she could remember. In her mid-40s, Karen was a fixture in the community, someone who prided herself on knowing her neighbors and keeping an eye out for everyone's well-being. With neatly styled blonde hair, a pressed white blouse, and a confident stride, she walked with a purpose through the park, her gaze sweeping over each face. Oak Ridge Park was Karen's sanctuary, her self-assigned responsibility. She had always believed it was her duty to preserve the safety and tranquility of the place. Over the years, Karen had come to recognize the faces of the regular park visitors. The early morning joggers, the parents pushing strollers, the teenagers playing basketball on the courts. She greeted each with a warm smile and often stopped to chat, feeling herself a part of the fabric that held Oak Ridge together. To Karen, this park was more than just a public space. It was an extension of her community, a piece of Oak Ridge that she was fiercely protective of. On this particular afternoon, as she strolled her familiar path along the edge of the playground, Karen's eyes caught sight of an unfamiliar family. They had set up a picnic near the sprawling oak tree, a place where she often saw regulars enjoy their time. The family, a black man and woman with 2 young children, were laughing together as they unpacked a wicker basket brimming with sandwiches, fruit, and cold drinks. The man, tall with an athletic build, spread out a checkered blanket on the grass, his deep laughter rolling across the park as he playfully chased his young daughter. The little girl squealed with delight as he lifted her onto his shoulders, her arms stretched out as if she were flying. Karen slowed her pace, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched them. There was nothing particularly unusual about a family having a picnic in Oak Ridge Park, yet a flicker of discomfort nudged at her, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. She had spent years getting to know the people who frequented the park, and she took pride in her familiarity with them. But this family felt different. They seemed out of place, almost as though they didn't belong in her carefully curated mental map of Oak Ridge. The woman, a beautiful figure with radiant dark skin and natural curls that framed her face, looked up and noticed Karen watching them. She gave a warm, genuine smile, raising her hand in a friendly wave. For a moment, Karen was caught off guard, quickly forcing herself to smile and wave back, yet the uneasy feeling lingered. She tried to shake it off, reasoning with herself that this family was simply new to the area. Still, the idea of them being strangers, disrupting the familiar atmosphere of the park, gnawed at her. As she continued her walk, Karen's mind kept drifting back to the family. She wondered if they were new residents, recent arrivals in Oak Ridge, or merely visitors passing through. Why had she never seen them before? She turned the question over in her mind, unable to let it go. She glanced around at the other park-goers, hoping someone else might be observing the family, but everyone else appeared oblivious, lost in their own cheerful gatherings. After a few minutes, she spotted Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor with whom she often exchanged pleasantries. Mrs. Jenkins was sitting on a bench, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on yet another project. Karen seized the opportunity, taking a seat beside her, casting her gaze subtly back toward the family. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Karen remarked casually, folding her hands in her lap. "Oh yes, just perfect," Mrs. Jenkins replied, not looking up from her knitting. Her focus was intent, her hands moving with practiced precision. Karen hesitated, glancing once more toward the family. "Do you know them?" she asked, her voice low as she nodded in their direction. The family having a picnic near the big oak. Mrs. Jenkins finally looked up, squinting in the sunlight as she tried to focus on the family. After a brief pause, she shook her head, uninterested. No, can't say I do. Probably just new folks in the area. People come and go, you know. Karen nodded, though her gaze lingered. I just don't remember seeing them before, she murmured, more to herself than to Mrs. Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins shrugged, her attention already back on her knitting. It's a public park, Karen. Anyone can come here to enjoy it. Karen forced a tight smile, pretending to accept the answer. You're right, of course, she replied, but as she rose to continue her walk, the feeling of unease lingered. She tried to distract herself, turning her attention to other scenes in the park, but her mind kept circling back to that family. As she walked further along the path, her inner thoughts became a churning spiral of what-ifs. Oak Ridge had always felt safe, and Karen had always felt secure in her role as its unofficial protector. Yet here she was, watching an innocent family enjoy a sunny afternoon, and feeling a creeping anxiety she couldn't explain. The father's laugh echoed across the park again, and Karen's heart raced inexplicably, as though warning her of some unseen threat. By the time she reached the opposite end of the park, she had convinced herself that it wouldn't hurt to be cautious. She didn't want to appear overbearing or paranoid, but the family's unfamiliar presence felt disruptive, unsettling. For a moment, she thought of simply going home, letting the day pass without incident. But her unease was too strong. She rationalized that her concern was rooted in a desire to protect the park's peacefulness, that as a longtime resident, she had a responsibility to safeguard Oak Ridge's serenity. Pulling out her phone, she quickly dialed her friend Lisa, a close confidant and fellow community advocate who shared her vigilance for keeping Oak Ridge safe. The phone rang twice before Lisa's cheerful voice answered, immediately sensing Karen's tension. Hey, Karen. What's up? Karen's voice wavered as she explained, her eyes locked onto the family from across the park. Lisa, are you busy right now? I'm at the park. And, well, there's a family here I've never seen before. They're having a picnic, and I know it sounds strange, but something just doesn't feel right. I thought maybe you could come by, just to check things out with me. On the other end of the line, Lisa paused, sounding confused. A strange feeling. Karen, it's just a family having a picnic. What's bothering you? Karen struggled to articulate her unease, stumbling over her words. I know it seems silly, but they don't look like they're from here. I mean, I've never seen them before, and it's like they don't belong. Lisa chuckled lightly, trying to ease Karen's nerves. It's a public park, Karen. People come here all the time. They could be visiting from out of town, or maybe they're just new to the area. Try to relax and enjoy your walk. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling. Her eyes drifted back to the family, watching as the mother leaned in close to her daughter, whispering something that made the little girl giggle. The father began tossing a ball to his son, both of them laughing as the boy scrambled to catch it. Karen tried to convince herself that it was harmless, that her friend was right. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, her anxiety only grew. Eventually, the compulsion to act overcame her hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone again, this time dialing the local police number. In that moment, a subtle shift occurred in the park, though only Karen felt it. A sensation that once set in motion couldn't be undone. As the phone rang, she steeled herself, reassuring herself that it was just a precaution. After all, what harm could there be in a quick check? A call for help. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she held her phone to her ear, the faint ring sounding louder than usual against the lively hum of Oak Ridge Park. She cast a glance toward the family in the distance, watching as they laughed together, oblivious to her scrutiny. With each ring, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. In her mind, she told herself that she was doing the right thing, that it was better to be cautious, but an uncomfortable knot of doubt twisted in her stomach. Oak Ridge Police Department, how can we help you? The voice on the other end of the line brought her back to the present, grounding her in the reality of her decision. Yes, hello, Karen replied, her voice low, almost as if she were confessing a secret. This may seem trivial, But I'm at Oak Ridge Park, and there's a family here that, well, they're unfamiliar, and something about them doesn't feel quite right. I just thought, maybe you could send someone to check it out." The dispatcher's voice was professional and neutral, though there was a slight pause before he responded. "Can you describe what's making you feel concerned, ma'am?" Karen hesitated, trying to find the words to explain what even she couldn't fully understand. She glanced back at the family, the father now tickling his young daughter as she shrieked in delight, her laughter ringing out over the park. The mother leaned back, watching them with a contented smile, her hands busy unpacking more snacks from a picnic basket. I don't really know how to explain it," Karen admitted, feeling a sudden pang of self-consciousness. "It's just that they're unfamiliar, and I can't shake this feeling that something might be off. I know it may sound odd, but I think it's better to be safe, right?" There was a longer pause this time, and Karen could almost feel the dispatcher weighing her words. "Understood, ma'am," he replied at last. "We'll send an officer to the park shortly. Please remain where you are." As the line clicked off, Karen tucked her phone away, her fingers still tingling. She exhaled a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a wave of relief washing over her. Her decision felt validated. She had done her part to protect the community she loved, hadn't she? Yet, as she looked back toward the family, her relief gave way to a creeping sense of dread. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the hum of conversations around her, the occasional bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves swaying in the breeze. But no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept drifting back to the family, drawn by a mix of curiosity and guilt. After a few tense minutes, the sound of sirens broke through the park's cheerful ambience. Karen's heart skipped a beat as she saw 2 police officers approaching from the park's entrance. Their presence caused a ripple of whispers among the other parkgoers, heads turning to follow the officers' steady march across the grass. A pang of self-doubt surged through Karen as she watched them approach the family. She wondered if perhaps she had overreacted. After all, they looked like any other family, enjoying a peaceful afternoon together. As the officers drew closer to the family, the mother looked up first, surprise flickering across her face. She glanced at her husband, confusion evident in her eyes, as the officers introduced themselves, gesturing for them to remain seated. Karen watched from a distance, straining to hear fragments of the conversation. Her stomach twisted as she noticed the subtle shift in the family's demeanor, the mother now clutching her children a little closer, her smile replaced by a look of unease. The father, however, remained calm, his expression composed as he addressed the officers. Karen could see him speaking confidently, gesturing with his hands as if to reassure the officers. There was something about his presence, a calm, dignified air, that stood in stark contrast to the tension building around them. He pulled out his wallet, showing the officers his ID, and after a few moments, Karen heard him say, "I'm Dr. Alex Thompson. My wife and I just moved here recently. I'm a pediatric surgeon at the Children's Hospital downtown." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to surprise. One of them took a step back, nodding in acknowledgement, his posture softening. Karen's pulse quickened as she realized the family's identity was far from what she had assumed. Dr. Thompson and his wife were respected figures in the community, though their faces were still new to Oak Ridge. Karen's face flushed as she pieced it all together. She felt the ground tilt beneath her as the enormity of her assumption began to sink in. Dr. Thompson's wife, Emily, spoke up then, her voice calm but carrying a tone of quiet frustration. "Is there a reason you needed to question us in front of our children?" she asked, her voice unwavering despite the tension in her eyes. One of the officers looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "We received a call from a concerned resident, ma'am. We didn't mean to disrupt your afternoon. We're sorry if this caused any distress." The children looked up at their parents with wide eyes, clearly sensing the tension even if they didn't fully understand it. Karen's chest tightened as she watched Emily gently stroke her son's back, offering silent reassurance. The family had come to Oak Ridge Park, hoping to find a sense of peace and community, yet her own fears had turned their afternoon into a spectacle. As the officers apologized and turned to leave, Karen took a step back, instinctively ducking out of sight as they passed by her spot. She felt a pang of guilt, her cheeks burning as she watched Dr. Thompson and his family resume their picnic, though the light-hearted laughter from before had dimmed. The children clung to their parents now, their carefree joy replaced by a palpable unease. Karen could feel the weight of their gaze, even though they didn't know she was there, watching them. For the rest of the afternoon, Karen remained at the park, though she kept her distance. She found herself unable to leave, drawn by the magnetic pull of her guilt and curiosity. Her mind raced with questions, her own motives now muddled in the harsh light of reality. What had she been protecting? And from whom? As the day drew on, Karen's thoughts turned inward. She replayed the events in her mind, dissecting each decision, each emotion that had led her here. She realized, with a dawning sense of shame, that she had not acted out of concern for her community's safety, but rather from an instinct rooted in fear, a fear of the unknown, of difference, of losing the comforting familiarity of the place she loved. She lingered in the park long after most visitors had left, the evening sun casting long shadows across the now empty grass. Oak Ridge had always felt like a place of peace, a sanctuary where everyone knew each other, but today she had torn a hole in that fabric, allowing her own assumptions to disturb its harmony. As she finally rose to leave, her thoughts turned to Dr. Thompson's children and the look of confusion on their faces. She wondered how they would remember this day, whether they would think of Oak Ridge as a welcoming place, or if they would always carry a sliver of suspicion, wondering who else might be watching them, waiting to judge. In that moment, Karen understood that her responsibility to Oak Ridge went beyond keeping it safe in a conventional sense. It was her duty to foster a true sense of community, one built on understanding and inclusivity, rather than exclusion and fear. She left the park feeling altered, carrying with her the knowledge that she couldn't undo what had been done, but perhaps with time, she could find a way to make it right. Consequences of assumptions. By the time Karen arrived home that evening, a strange heaviness hung over her. She went about her usual routines, preparing dinner, setting the table, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene at the park on an endless loop. She told herself that she had only done what she thought was right, but doubt continued to gnaw at her. As she ate in silence, her thoughts drifted to Dr. Thompson's family. The look in his wife's eyes as she held their children close, and the unmistakable embarrassment in the officers' faces as they realized who they had questioned. Karen's phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. She picked it up and saw a notification from the local Oak Ridge Community Forum, a popular online group where residents shared neighborhood news, updates, and much to her dismay, occasional gossip. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked on the notification, and the page opened to reveal a post that instantly made her stomach drop. Someone had captured a video of the incident in the park, and it had been posted online. The video was short but powerful. In the shaky footage, one of the officers stood in front of Dr. Thompson, explaining the reason for their inquiry, while Dr. Thompson calmly introduced himself, identifying his profession and background. The camera panned over to the children, who were clinging to their mother, their expressions bewildered and anxious. The clip ended with the officers apologizing and walking away, leaving the family to resume their picnic in a now tense silence. The video was captioned, "New family harassed at Oak Ridge Park. What happened to welcome and inclusivity?" Karen's fingers tightened around her phone as she scrolled through the comments. Her heart raced as she read the stream of reactions, each one harsher than the last. "This is unacceptable. Imagine being questioned while just trying to enjoy a family day out. Why does it feel like Oak Ridge is taking a step back into the dark ages? Can't believe this still happens here. Shame on whoever called the police over this." The words blurred before her eyes, each comment sinking into her skin, leaving an ache she couldn't ignore. She put her phone down, feeling exposed, even though no one knew that she was the one who had made the call. Yet the anonymity didn't ease her guilt. It amplified it. She knew she was the source of the situation that had humiliated Dr. Thompson's family, shattered the day's peace, and stirred up a storm of controversy within the community. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her friend Lisa. "Karen, did you see the video? I can't believe someone actually called the police on that family. Poor kids, I thought Oak Ridge was better than this." Karen's fingers hovered over the keyboard, feeling a pull to respond but unsure of what to say. She typed and deleted several responses, finally settling on, "Yeah, I saw it. Really unfortunate." She hit send, her fingers trembling as she set the phone down again, shame washing over her. As the night wore on, Karen's thoughts circled back to the decisions she had made. She couldn't help but wonder, what had she really been protecting that afternoon? And from whom? Was it possible that her fear hadn't been about danger at all, but rather about the destruction of the familiar, the comfortable monotony of her routine? The next morning, Karen awoke feeling the weight of her guilt hanging over her like a cloud. She decided to skip her usual morning walk through the park, afraid of what whispers and glances she might encounter. She spent the day at home, preoccupied with the image of Dr. Thompson's children, their small faces etched with confusion and fear. She wondered what conversations they were having at home now, how their parents might try to explain why the police had questioned them simply for enjoying a picnic in the park. Later that afternoon, Karen received another notification from the Oak Ridge Community Forum. The family, as it turned out, had written a response to the video. "Thank you to everyone who expressed concern. While yesterday's experience was unsettling, we want to assure everyone that we don't hold resentment. My family and I recently moved to Oak Ridge, hoping to build new memories and friendships in a place we believed was open and welcoming. It's our hope that moving forward, we can all work together to make Oak Ridge a community we're proud of, a place where everyone belongs." Reading their message, Karen felt a swell of emotion. She was struck by the grace and dignity with which they had responded. They hadn't called out the person who reported them, nor had they pointed fingers. Instead, they had taken the high road, offering an olive branch to a community that had met them with suspicion. The simple kindness of their response gnawed Karen, intensifying her guilt. That evening, she sat on her couch, contemplating her next step. She knew she couldn't remain silent, pretending as though nothing had happened. After several long moments, she took a deep breath and opened her laptop, typing up a post of her own. "To the Oak Ridge community, I owe everyone, especially Dr. Thompson and his family, an apology. I was the one who called the police yesterday. My intention was never to harm or embarrass anyone, but I realize now that my actions were based on fear and assumption. I failed to welcome this wonderful family as new members of our community, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I can't undo what happened, but I hope that in time, I can earn back your trust and learn to be a better neighbor." Her hand shook as she pressed post. She felt vulnerable, exposed, like she was standing on a precipice, uncertain of what awaited her on the other side. A trickle of responses came in almost immediately, and Karen braced herself as she began to read. Some comments were forgiving, acknowledging her courage in coming forward and apologizing publicly. Others were harsher, accusing her of overstepping and being discriminatory, questioning how she could have been so quick to judge. Each response brought its own sting, but Karen forced herself to keep reading, believing she owed it to the community and to herself to face the full weight of her actions. Later that night, she received a private message from Dr. Thompson's wife, Emily. "Karen, thank you for your apology. I can't say it didn't hurt us, especially for our kids to see the police coming to question us like that. But we know everyone makes mistakes. Alex and I believe in moving forward with grace, and we hope that, in time, we can all get to know each other better. After all, isn't that what community is about?" Tears pricked Karen's eyes as she read Emily's message. She was overwhelmed by the kindness extended to her, even after the hurt she had caused. In that moment, she understood just how much she had to learn. not only about acceptance and tolerance, but about the true meaning of community. As she lay in bed that night, Karen made a promise to herself that she would make amends. This experience, painful and humbling, had opened her eyes to her own biases, ones she hadn't realized were so deeply embedded. She realized that protecting Oak Ridge didn't mean defending it against outsiders, but rather embracing everyone who chose to make it their home. In the days that followed, Karen began to immerse herself in learning more about the diversity within Oak Ridge. She attended community events she might have ignored in the past, spoke to neighbors she hadn't previously known, and slowly her own heart began to open. She decided that she wanted to be more than just a fixture in Oak Ridge. She wanted to be a true part of the community, one that was welcoming, inclusive, and supportive of all who chose to be there. And so, Karen's journey began, a path of self-reflection and growth that she knew would take time but felt determined to pursue. Her actions had caused pain, but with humility and dedication, she hoped to make amends, one step at a time. An unplanned encounter. Days passed, and despite the cool fall breeze settling over Oak Ridge, Karen felt the sting of humiliation and regret as if it were fresh each day. She had withdrawn from her usual routines, feeling like an outsider in her own community. Her morning walks through the park were suspended. Her visits to the local cafe, where she once caught up with friends and neighbors, now seemed daunting. Though some people had commented in support on her post, others had been less forgiving. But beyond all the whispers and judgments, one voice mattered most to her, that of Dr. Thompson's family, the ones she had wronged. On a brisk Saturday morning, Karen decided to face her fear and walk through the park once again. She bundled herself in a long coat and scarf, hoping that the cool air would calm her nerves. She strolled along the familiar winding paths, the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot reminding her of Oak Ridge's usual peacefulness, a feeling she hadn't experienced since that day. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with passersby, worried that someone might recognize her as the one who called the police. Then, as if the universe had decided it was time to test her resolve, she saw Dr. Thompson's family in the distance. They had set up a small picnic near the playground, the same spot where they had been the day she called the police. A strange mix of emotions washed over her: embarrassment, guilt, and a renewed sense of determination to make things right. Karen slowed her pace, watching the family from afar. Dr. Thompson was tossing a small football with his son, his laughter carrying through the air as the boy tried, unsuccessfully, to catch it. His daughter, wearing a bright pink jacket, stood beside her mother, who was helping her zip it up. The scene was warm, natural, and exactly as it should be, an ordinary family enjoying a peaceful morning in the park. Yet Karen knew she was the reason that morning had been stolen from them before, replaced with fear and suspicion. Her heart pounded as she approached, but before she could change her mind, Dr. Thompson noticed her. His expression shifted slightly, his eyes meeting hers with an unreadable gaze. Emily, his wife, looked up too, her face softening with what Karen hoped was compassion. Feeling small beneath their gaze, she took a deep breath and walked over, her hands clenching in her pockets. "Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice shaking slightly. I just wanted to apologize again, face to face. What I did was thoughtless and wrong, and I can't express how sorry I am for ruining your day here last week." The family looked at each other for a moment, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. Then Dr. Thompson nodded, his expression warm but serious. "Thank you, Karen," he said, his tone calm. "We appreciate your apology and the post you made in the community group. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Karen felt a wave of relief, though it was tempered by the shame still lingering in her heart. She hesitated, unsure of what to say next, but Emily stepped in, her voice gentle. "Honestly, we've faced things like this before," she said, glancing at her children, who had grown quiet, watching the adults. "But this was the first time it happened here, in Oak Ridge. We moved here hoping to raise our kids in a place where they'd feel safe, accepted, and to be questioned like that in front of them. It was difficult. Karen felt the weight of Emily's words pressing into her. She looked down at the two children, whose eyes were wide and curious, though a hint of lingering confusion and wariness shadowed their expressions. She knelt to their level, her voice soft and filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry for what happened," she said, looking directly at them. "You didn't deserve that. This park is your park too, and I had no right to make you feel like you didn't belong." The children exchanged a glance, their innocence visible in their puzzled expressions. Dr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, giving him a slight nod. Karen looked up at Dr. Thompson, feeling the surge of appreciation for the grace with which he was handling her apology. She didn't feel she deserved it, but there it was, an opportunity to start anew. She stood, brushing leaves from her knees, her thoughts racing as she searched for a way to bridge the gap she had created. "Maybe," she began, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Maybe I could make it up to you all somehow. I'd like to host a picnic for the families in the neighborhood, a way to bring everyone together. It could be something positive, something that shows Oak Ridge's true spirit." Dr. Thompson raised his eyebrows, a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. Emily looked at him, then back at Karen, a small smile playing on her lips. "That sounds like a beautiful idea, Karen," Emily said softly. "A chance for the community to come together, to get to know each other better. I think that would be really meaningful." Karen felt her heart lift, a surge of relief and purpose coursing through her. She had expected judgment, and perhaps even a cold dismissal, yet here they were, giving her a chance to make amends. She felt the flicker of something unfamiliar, a desire to understand, to connect with them in a way she hadn't tried with others before. For the rest of the morning, Karen sat with the Thompsons, joining them on their blanket under the gentle warmth of the late morning sun. They shared stories about their lives, their backgrounds, and their dreams for their children. Dr. Thompson spoke about his work as a pediatric surgeon, the challenges he faced, and the joy he found in helping children. Emily, an educator and advocate for inclusive learning, shared her own struggles with Karen, describing how hard she worked to ensure that children of all backgrounds felt seen and valued. As Karen listened, something in her softened. These were ordinary people with extraordinary hearts, people who had chosen Oak Ridge as their home, just like she had. She realized that her perception of community had been limited, that she had built walls around her understanding, walls that had prevented her from truly embracing the diversity Oak Ridge had begun to attract. When it was time for them to part ways, Karen felt a strange sense of loss. She had spent years in Oak Ridge, yet this was the first time she felt a real connection with neighbors who had once been strangers to her. She shook hands with Dr. Thompson and Emily, giving the children a warm smile, hoping they would remember her as something other than the person who had once called the police on their family. As she walked home, her heart felt lighter, but her mind was racing. She spent the rest of the afternoon drafting ideas for the neighborhood picnic she had proposed. She envisioned it as a celebration of Oak Ridge's diversity, a way for families to come together and share their stories, a space for connection and understanding. She wanted it to be something beautiful and meaningful, a true reflection of the Oak Ridge she hoped to help build. She posted her idea to the community forum that evening, sharing her vision for a unity picnic and inviting families to join, to bring food, stories, and open hearts. Within hours, the post was filled with comments, neighbors expressing their support and excitement. Several offered to help organize, including Emily, who sent Karen a personal message, promising to bring traditional dishes from her family's heritage. As she read through the comments, Karen felt a profound sense of purpose. Her fear and suspicion had once fueled division, but now she had the chance to use her energy to build bridges. She was determined to be more than just a passive resident of Oak Ridge. She wanted to be an active part of its growth, a person who helped nurture a sense of belonging for everyone. The day of the picnic arrived, and Oak Ridge Park was transformed into a tapestry of colorful blankets, each family sharing dishes and stories from their own cultures and backgrounds. Children played together, laughing and shouting as they ran across the grass, while parents mingled, swapping stories and laughter. Karen watched as Dr. Thompson's children raced by, their faces beaming with the joy of belonging, unshadowed by the suspicion that had once marred their experience. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the park, Karen felt a deep, fulfilling sense of peace. She knew she couldn't undo the hurt she had caused, but here, amidst the laughter and connection, she saw a new beginning, a future where Oak Ridge could truly be a home for everyone, a place that celebrated every family who chose to live there. And as she looked around, she felt, perhaps for the first time, that she had found her place in it too. Understanding and reflection. In the days following the Unity picnic, Karen felt a lingering glow of warmth. The event had exceeded her expectations, turning Oak Ridge Park into a vibrant patchwork of shared cultures, laughter, and acceptance. Families brought dishes from their heritages, children made new friends, and stories that might have remained untold were shared under the golden autumn sky. Yet, as fulfilling as the picnic had been, Karen knew it was only the beginning of her journey to mend her fractured sense of community and deepen her understanding of others. That week, Karen found herself at the library, searching through the history section, guided by a desire to understand the experiences of communities she had once viewed as others. She picked up books on the civil rights movement, personal stories of immigrants who had struggled to belong, and articles on the impact of racial profiling. Each page felt like a revelation, a window into perspectives that had always been there, but which she had overlooked. In every story, she saw shadows of her own fears and assumptions, reflections of the suspicions she had harbored. The stories revealed to her that discrimination was often rooted not just in explicit hostility, but also in the small, almost imperceptible biases people carried with them. One evening, after reading a particularly moving memoir by a prominent civil rights activist, Karen felt compelled to reach out to Dr. Thompson and his wife, Emily, once again. She dialed Emily's number, nervousness buzzing through her as she waited. When Emily answered, Karen explained her new initiative. She wanted to conduct community talks to explore the experiences and challenges faced by people from different backgrounds within Oak Ridge. "I know I can't erase what happened, but I want to do better," Karen said, her voice raw with sincerity. "And I think if people were more exposed to the struggles others go through, maybe we could prevent another situation like the one I created." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Emily spoke, her voice soft and filled with warmth. "Karen, I think that's a beautiful idea. People underestimate the power of sharing stories. Sometimes, all it takes is hearing someone's journey to see them as more than just a stranger. Let's meet up and talk about how we can make this happen." Over the following weeks, Karen worked closely with Emily and other members of the Oak Ridge community to organize a Voices of Oak Ridge evening, a night dedicated to sharing personal stories. As word spread, people from all backgrounds expressed interest in attending. Emily took on the role of coordinating speakers, encouraging families to share moments of joy, pain, triumph, and resilience. Dr. Thompson also volunteered to speak, planning to share his own story as a Black man navigating a career in medicine, a field not immune to prejudice. As the date approached, Karen's anticipation grew. She spent hours rehearsing her opening speech, unsure of how she would convey her newfound understanding and humility. She hoped her words would reflect not only her regret, but her commitment to change. She planned to recount her own experience, the events in the park, the guilt she carried, and the lessons she had learned about unconscious biases and community responsibility. The night of the Voices of Oak Ridge event finally arrived. The community center was filled to capacity, with residents from all walks of life gathered under the same roof. Rows of folding chairs faced a small, makeshift stage adorned with simple decorations, paper lanterns, a few plants, and a wooden podium. The lights were dimmed, lending a sense of intimacy to the evening, as though everyone there were part of a close-knit family. Karen stepped up to the podium, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and began, her voice shaky but filled with conviction. "Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Karen Turner, and I've lived in Oak Ridge for as long as I can remember. Like many of you, I've always seen this place as a home, a safe space, a community. But recently, I made a mistake. One that hurt people who are part of this community, people who deserve to feel as safe and welcome here as I do. And so tonight, I want to start with an apology, not just to Dr. Thompson and his family, but to everyone here, because I now understand that my actions reflected fears I didn't even know I had." The room was silent as Karen spoke, her voice growing stronger with each word. She recounted her journey since that day, her efforts to educate herself, and her commitment to becoming a more compassionate member of the community. "This isn't just a story about an apology," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's about understanding that Oak Ridge is changing, and that change is something we should welcome. When we embrace each other, when we listen." For the first time, she felt she was part of that community in a meaningful way. She resolved that her role would be to nurture that bond, to protect not just the physical space of Oak Ridge, but the spirit of unity it was becoming known for. And in that resolve, Karen found something she had been searching for all along, a sense of purpose rooted not in fear, but in love. A changed perspective. In the weeks that followed the Voices of Oak Ridge event, a palpable shift seemed to settle over Oak Ridge. Karen sensed it in the way neighbors greeted one another on morning walks, in the small, considerate gestures exchanged at the local market, and in the school where children of all backgrounds now seemed to play together without the silent divides that had once lingered in the air. The stories shared that evening had woven invisible threads between the people of Oak Ridge, stitching together lives that had once existed in parallel, each contained within its own bubble. For Karen, these changes were like a dream unfolding in real time. Each interaction was a reminder of how far she had come from the woman she'd been just a few short months ago. She no longer viewed Oak Ridge as a quaint, isolated haven to be kept safe from unfamiliar faces. Instead, she saw it as a vibrant, inclusive tapestry, a true community where everyone had a rightful place. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the town in a warm, amber glow, Karen found herself sitting on a bench in Oak Ridge Park. She watched the world around her, children playing tag under the large oak tree, families setting up for picnics, teenagers chatting and laughing on the swings. The sights, sounds, and smells of the park filled her senses, and she felt a profound gratitude wash over her. This park, once a place of routine and duty, had become a symbol of transformation. Karen had made it her ritual to visit the park every Sunday afternoon, volunteering as a community coordinator, organizing cleanup efforts and family-friendly events that welcome newcomers and longtime residents alike. The recent projects she'd undertaken, such as planting a unity garden with flowers donated by families from various cultural backgrounds, had been particularly meaningful. Each flower bed held blooms that represented different nations and traditions, turning a small patch of land into a living symbol of Oak Ridge's diversity. One Sunday, as she was tending to the Unity Garden, she heard a familiar voice. "Karen, that garden's looking more beautiful every time I see it." It was Emily Thompson, carrying a tray of homemade lemon bars wrapped in a cloth. Her children ran ahead of her, their laughter filling the park as they chased each other in playful circles. Karen looked up, beaming, and hugged Emily. "Thank you, Emily. And thank you for the lemon bars. You know, I'm still learning my way around gardening, but I think the garden's turning out pretty well. It's amazing what a little cooperation can do." Emily smiled, her gaze moving over the vibrant flowers. "It's perfect, Karen. My kids love it, and I think it's a beautiful reminder of how far we've all come." They sat together on the bench, watching the park around them. Karen noticed how the park had come alive, filled with families and friends, laughter and joy, each person feeling as though they belonged. She turned to Emily, her expression thoughtful. You know, when I first called the police that day, I thought I was protecting Oak Ridge, Karen began, her voice soft. But I realize now that I was only protecting my own narrow view of what this place was supposed to be. I was so afraid of change. I thought that if things stayed the same, Oak Ridge would stay safe. But I was wrong. Emily placed a gentle hand on Karen's shoulder. We all make mistakes, Karen. What matters is what we do afterward. You didn't just apologize. You worked to change, and that's something not everyone would do. Karen smiled, feeling a mix of humility and pride. It had been a long, challenging road, one marked by moments of painful self-reflection and growth. But sitting there, with Emily beside her and the park thriving around them, she felt that every step had been worth it. As they continued to talk, families began arriving for the next community event, a multicultural potluck that Karen and a team of volunteers had organized. Tables were set up under the sprawling oak tree, each one adorned with dishes from around the world, contributed by families excited to share a piece of their heritage. A soft breeze carried the scent of spices, sweet pastries, and savory stews through the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of people exchanging recipes and stories. At one point, Dr. Thompson joined Karen and Emily, his usual calm demeanor infused with pride as he watched his children playing with their new friends. He looked at Karen, his eyes filled with gratitude. Karen, I don't think we could have asked for a more welcoming home than Oak Ridge has become, he said, his voice warm. And a big part of that is because of you. Karen felt her cheeks warm, a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Alex. But I'm just one person. It's everyone here who's made this possible. I think Oak Ridge has always been a special place. We just needed to open our eyes a little wider. Dr. Thompson nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That's true. Sometimes it takes a spark to ignite change, but once it starts, it becomes something bigger than any one person. Look around. This is a community in the truest sense. As the evening unfolded, Karen found herself moving from table to table, laughing, sampling dishes, and listening to the stories people shared with her. She spoke with an elderly couple who had moved to Oak Ridge from another country decades ago, raising their children here and watching the town evolve over the years. She listened to a young man who had recently moved from the city, describing his excitement at finding a place that felt like home. Through each interaction, Karen felt her understanding of Oak Ridge deepen. Each person, each story, added a layer of richness to the town's identity. She no longer saw people as familiar or unfamiliar. Instead, she saw them as threads in the same tapestry, each one unique but essential to the whole. By the time the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the park, Karen felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. She glanced at Emily and Dr. Thompson, who were helping their children gather their belongings, and waved goodbye to them, feeling a surge of gratitude for the friendship that had grown between them. As she left the park, Karen took a final look at the Unity Garden, its vibrant colors illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamps. She thought about the person she had been just months ago, a woman who had once been driven by fear and suspicion, who had let her assumptions cloud her judgment. That version of Karen felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who had learned to embrace change, who had found strength in vulnerability, and who had discovered the beauty of community in its truest form. In the days and years to come, Karen remained an active member of Oak Ridge's evolving identity. She organized more events, championed efforts to create inclusive spaces, and even led diversity workshops in the local schools, helping children understand the importance of empathy and understanding. Oak Ridge had become a place not just of scenic parks and familiar faces, but of openness, compassion, and resilience, a place that welcomed every person who called it. In the days and years to come, Karen remained an active member of Oak Ridge's evolving identity. She organized more events, championed efforts to create inclusive spaces, and even led diversity workshops in the local schools, helping children understand the importance of empathy and understanding. Oak Ridge had become a place not just of scenic parks and familiar faces, but of openness, compassion, and resilience, a place that welcomed every person who called it home. And so, with each new day, Karen walked the paths of Oak Ridge Park, feeling a deeper connection to the town she had loved for so long. She had come to realize that true community wasn't about protecting things as they were, but about welcoming the possibilities of what they could become. And with each step, she carried the lessons of her journey, grateful for the family who had shown her the way. In the end, Oak Ridge was not just a place of peace and comfort. It was a place of growth and unity, a living testament to the power of understanding and acceptance. And Karen, once a silent guardian of the familiar, had become a champion of change, a testament to the beauty of opening one's heart to the world.